Hello and welcome to the Brazilian BA guest. It's a pleasure to have you here. If this is your first time on my channel, please subscribe, click on the bell so you can be warned every time we have a new video. I have interviewed several of very smart people working in the world of software development, product development, business improvement, and stuff related to business analysis, which is the area that is my expertise and my passion. And today I have someone who recently wrote a very interesting article talking about Agile. My guest today is Mr. Scott Ambler, an expert in methodologies, frameworks, modeling, business. Scott, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Scott, you have written a couple of articles, but the first one caught the attention of a lot of people because you are not very, let's say, easy with the words. And that's the question I have for you to start this conversation today. Did the Agile community, and I have difficult to say that, not just because of the words, it's difficult because of my accent. So I'm not sure if I can differentiate shit the shit, right? Sorry about that. I know your answer is yes, because that's the name of her article. But my question to start is, what did motivate you to write about that?
Yeah, so it's been the last year or two has been very not pleasant in the Agile community. People are getting laid off. They're losing their jobs. Contracts are ending. It's phenomenally difficult now for anybody who's an Agile coach or a Scrum Master or anybody that smells of being an Agile consultant to find employment. And the reason why is just this lack of productivity. That the promises that the Agile community made were not fulfilled for the most part. And what happened? And the reason why this happened, well, first of all, some of the promises were just ridiculous to begin with, like doing twice the work in half the time or 10 times productivity. And you know what? I have worked in organizations that are so messed up that does happen. But doing anything would help those organizations not becoming more agile. And so what happens is, most organizations aren't totally messed up. So the room for improvement isn't quite there. So yes, everybody can improve, and yes, everything can get better, but you're not going to see major improvements in productivity because it's certainly not very quickly. So these promises that got made were not realistic. And the problem also was it was too simplistic. We saw, it was all this, take a 2-day certification and suddenly you'll be a master, and all this phenomenally, just ethically questionable behavior that was the norm in this industry. And it all fell apart all at once. And I think, there was a lot of very good reasons why. So it caught up to us. And I was actually surprised it took as long as it did. It was a little over 2 decades of what I call the Agile gold rush. And now the gold rush is over. Agile is still doing okay, but we're gonna have a few lean years until things get better.
Tell me more about certifications. What's your issues about Agile certifications?
Yeah, so the challenge was that there was all these certifications that you basically bought. You didn't have to earn them. You attend a 2-day course and you write a test that everybody passes. Some of these tests had a 99. Last I heard was a 99.7% success rate on the first attempt. So nobody's, they're testing to see if you've got a pulse, basically. So you buy a certification and then you run around calling yourself a master or a coach, and this was the norm, right? So the story I like to tell was that my wife is a landscape architect, so we spend time with architects and real professionals. And a few years ago, I was out for dinner one night with some of her colleagues, and I started describing what the certification scam was that was going on in the Agile community, and they couldn't believe me. They just wouldn't believe me that anybody would fall for that. And I said, I know, don't trust me, look into it. And And sure enough, they out whips the phone, and they were astounded that such a thing was happening, because it's certainly not a reflection of professionalism. And I worked with organizations where I was working with the HR departments to help them hire. I think this is years ago now. Help them hire Agile people. And I was trying to explain to them why asking for some of these certifications was actually meaningless, because you did nothing to earn them, and all these people had them. So and it was trivial to get them. So and they couldn't believe me, right? Because they trusted the community. This was the problem. We broke people's trust, and we had people saying, "Oh, I'm a certified master." And it's an industry certification. And the HR department, who knows nothing about this, believes it, right? They hear the word master, they hear the word certification, they hear the word professional. Like, all these words were being thrown around by the Agile community. It's questionable, at the best, in the best case scenario, it's questionable if they even knew what those words meant. And I'm being very nice by saying that. I suspect they very well knew the implications of words like master and professional, and we're still throwing them around anyways. And I think that's a serious problem. So eventually, organizations started realizing that the vast majority of these Agile certifications were meaningless, and then it clued in, right? So I think there was no meat behind these certifications. You weren't really learning much, and that's a serious problem.
And you meant we lose trust, and that's powerful. And a lot of trust was deposited in ways of working, like frameworks. And my question for you in these areas: are frameworks foolproof recipes for improve of business?
Yeah, well, so it depends, but the answer is pretty much no, right? So some of these frameworks, I'm sure, worked well in where they originally came from, right? So some process works very well in one organization, and suddenly it gets pitched as this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and that all these people should adopt it, and then it gets dumbed down from there, right? So you write it up as a 13-page document, and you give people 2 days of training in it, and then you tell organizations, just adopt this and do what you're told, and you'll get you'll have like 4 times productivity increases. And it's just no, right? So like adopting a framework, one of the frameworks, if you're adopting something that makes sense for the context that you're in, and you adopt it successfully, it could be a good start at improvement, without a doubt, right? Because it probably solves a few problems for you and probably describes what you need to do. But at best, it was only a start. And I think this is where a lot of the expectations were off. And you needed to, so if you treated it as a good start and then improved from there, then very quickly you would work your way away from that framework into something that actually made sense for you. So, so an example would be Spotify. So the Spotify organization, they created their own process, eventually called the Spotify method. And then it got written up, and a few people talked about it at conferences and that, and it took off, right? And one or two phenomenally large consulting organizations got behind it and told all these executives at organizations that basically had no idea what they're doing, adopt the Spotify method because it's really, it had all these cool words, right? Like tribe and squad and all this sort of stuff, right? But what they didn't talk about was the fact that the Spotify itself had moved on from working that way, and they were a Swedish online music company, right? So a process that works very well for a Swedish online music company in the early 2010s might not be very good for a Brazilian bank, for example. So, but the executives would park their brains at the door because, well, hey, we're going to have tribes and guilds and all this good sort of stuff, right? And then it was inflicted on their organizations, and then surprisingly, it wouldn't work out very well. And there was a lot of details missing from the description of that method. So great stuff, don't get me wrong, but just probably not good stuff for you. And certainly, as I said, Spotify was very clear they'd moved on from that, and weren't, because they evolved as an organization, and what worked for them 15 years ago.
Very much. I like very much the way you approach a framework as a starting point and not as an end point. So that's not the goal. The framework helps you to understand what you have to learn, and then you can learn. So using the word that you use in the article, too much framework adoption, not enough improvement. A framework should help you to improve and change and not be dependent on it. But there was these people training, and you mentioned training. And another question I have for you is, was agile training and coaching providing the skills and knowledge people required to do their jobs?
Well, clearly not. So, and like, and that's a generalization, right? But there's some very good coaches out there, and there was some very good training out there. But overall, across the industry, the answer would have to be no. And I will let the success rate of agile adoption speak for itself. I'll let the the productivity improvements that we simply didn't see speak for itself. So we saw all this money invested in framework adoption, and yet not much came out of it. And yes, there was, some organizations did very well. There's also some organizations that did very poorly. On average, it didn't really, the promises simply weren't met. And one of the challenges with the coaches is that you would, if you only knew a single framework, and it doesn't really matter what that framework was, you can coach people in that framework. But as soon as they need to move away from it for very good reasons, or not even move towards it to begin with, because that framework simply didn't make any sense for that organization, then, or that at least the team within the organization, then how much help could they possibly be doing, right? Like if you're trying to force fit Scrum on a team where Kanban is a better option, you're not helping at all. And I saw that all the time. I was brought into one organization years ago, and they tell me that first thing they tell me is that they're a Scrum organization and they're struggling. So first of all, I know they're not a Scrum organization because it's just the nature. I'm not going to tell you who they were, but just the nature of that organization, I knew for a fact that there's no possible way that all their teams could be doing Scrum, because it wouldn't make sense for most of them. And sure enough, I get on the floor, and they're showing, it's the usual thing. They're showing me around and introducing me to things. And I could see just from the stuff that the way that the teams were sitting with each other and the stuff they had on the walls, that most of them weren't doing Scrum, and rightfully so. But what they were doing was they were following the Scrum ceremonies, reporting that to management who didn't really know what they're doing. At least they certainly didn't understand the processes. They believed that all their team was doing Scrum. Meanwhile, it was like, I could look at a team going, that's a Kanban team, it'd be like a services team, right? They were spinning this story that their help desk was doing Scrum. Come on. It's not even remotely possible. And what they were doing was they were faking Scrum to shut management up, and management wasn't competent enough to know that. So we had some fairly harsh discussions, and I said, this is not, you're not doing Scrum. Most of your teams are not doing Scrum. Here, these teams are, and they're doing okay. These teams are faking it, and you're wasting their time forcing them to fake it. And you really need to get your act together on this. So then, we went from there. But this is the problem in these organizations. So when you hear this story that this is an XYZ organization, XYZ being one of the frameworks, it had better be a really small one. More than likely, it's a one-team organization, or they're fooling themselves, because it simply doesn't make any sense. And this is the problem too, right? They're force-fitting frameworks into situations where it didn't make sense at all.
Yeah, not just about frameworks. You also mentioned in your article something about teachers and coaches worrying very much about the soft skills development and neglecting the hard skills development. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the point I made there, that there was too much fluff and not enough stuff. And if you remember, there used to be a stuff not fluff conference years ago. I actually guess it's still going. Fantastic conference. But the thing was, like, there was all this focus on soft skills, and soft skills are certainly important, but so are hard skills, right? So what would happen is you'd have all these people who were coaches who didn't have the background in what they were coaching, right? So if I'm going to coach a software development team, you damn well better believe I should have a background in software development. If not, I'm useless. And this was the problem, right? Like you get these people and they'd have a couple of days of training in this and a couple of days of training in that, but they didn't have a background in software development or in marketing, whatever type of team they were trying to coach. So all they could do was coach you on softer things. And that's okay. It has its place. But, if I've got a team that doesn't know how to code or doesn't know how to architect things or doesn't know how to build software or, do CI/CD or testing or whatever, then it doesn't really matter what, are they having a good time? Are they having a big group hug every day? Well, good for them, but you're not actually building any software. So I don't care how good you feel about that. I really don't. Right. And I would see teams like this. Well, we feel really great about failing. Okay. So what? So, and once again, these organizations park their brains at the door. So for example, I've got a young daughter, and if I wanted to get her, get her involved in football, I would know. I know nothing about football other than you kick a ball around, you try to get it in net, and that's about it, right? Like, I've watched a few football games. That's it. But I know inherently that if I'm going to hire a football coach for my daughter, that person needs to have played football probably for years. I want to hear a story how they were playing it as a kid and did it in school. Maybe they were on a team. Maybe they were went for the professional leagues. Maybe they were in a professional league. Or I want to hear a story of, they were aiming for that, and then they blew their knee out, and now they're coaching. Now they're in a high school coaching kids to learn how to play football, right? And so I would want to hear a story like that. And knowing nothing about football, I know I could probably hire a football coach. Yet we had these organizations hiring Agile coaches, and they did to coach their software teams or to coach, their data team or their strategy team or whatever. And they didn't know enough to ask, oh, have you ever done software development? And if the answer is no, you're not qualified to coach a software development team. It's like when a project manager tells you, oh, I can manage any team because I'm a project manager. No, if you don't know software development, you're not qualified to manage a software development team. So, I realize you're delusional and you may have been trained that way, but it's simply not true. And I don't want to pay the bill for your multi-year learning experience to find out you're not qualified for that job. Right. But I know these things. And unfortunately, most of the leadership in these organizations clearly didn't, because they were purposely hiring unqualified coaches. Now, what also happened, Agile grew so fast that the marketplace didn't have enough skilled people in it to fill the job. So then you ended up with these, quick certifications and all these people that didn't have the background to do the job, and they're all getting hired because, well, once again, the HR folks didn't know what they were looking at either, and trusted people's resumes when they said, oh, they had these 4 certifications, and they believed the certifications were meaningful. So there was a lot of stuff going on all at once, and everybody was contributing to this. Unfortunately, there was very few people that were really pushing back when all these things were happening. Instead, they were all going with the flow because it was easy money. The gold rush was on.
I'm thinking about this lack of quality of the people who are working in Agile. You already mentioned frameworks and skills. So, and I would say that some purist Agilists argument that Agile was not correctly implemented, and that's why it failed. Frameworks were not being followed by the book, they would say. Are they right?
No, they were not. What they were doing was they were trying to sell certification and training and coaching and all that good sort of stuff, right? So when you only know one framework or one way of working, then yeah, you desperately need the people that you're coaching to follow that one way, because you'd very quickly get out of your safety zone. And so this was the fundamental problem, right? So you would get these, like in the early 2000s, one of the big arguments was, Scrum, what called Scrum butt. And you would, you're doing it, you claim you're doing Scrum, but you're doing Scrum, but you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you're not doing that. So therefore you're not doing Scrum. I could care less if I was doing Scrum properly. The real question, or Safe, or Less, or Spotify, insert any framework you want. What I care about is, are you effective? Are you learning? Are you getting better? And that's what Agile really should have been focusing on. They should have been focusing on, are we doing the right thing in the situation that we find ourselves in? And that's harder, right? That's a lot harder for you need to have broader. If I'm a coach and I'm trying to coach that way, I need to have much broader experience. I need to have a much broader understanding and knowledge based on years of learning, not days of learning. And this was the challenge with these coaches and trainers that only knew the one method and had been doing that for years. They bought into this religion. They had to sell this purity, this pure agile message, or this pure framework message, because that's what they knew, and that had been sold to them as well. So the people behind all this was the message they were selling, and march to my drumbeat. Because as soon as you start marching in a different way, as soon as you really start improving, I guarantee you improve away from the framework by definition, right? So what people were preaching about improvement was very clearly not what they were practicing, because I could start with any of those frameworks today. And this is the argument that I always made, right? Like, install, let's say in magical fantasy land, we can create a Scrum organization, or we can create a SAFe organization, and then on Monday, next Monday, all my teams are doing Scrum, or all my teams are doing whatever framework. But they're also really doing Agile, and really doing Agile means that you're constantly learning, constantly improving, constantly experimenting, and trying to get better. So within a few weeks, and certainly within a few months, all of my teams, if they were really Agile, should have been improving, and they all would have they would have gone on different paths, because they're different people in different contexts trying to achieve different things. And they all would have improved in different ways away from whatever that framework was that they started with purely on Monday morning, right? So there'd be no possible way you would get these pure environments if you were actually doing Agile. So it was just, but then the problem is now you gotta be skilled. The coaches and the team leads, they need to be skilled enough to help these teams on the real learning journey and work in different ways and be able to help them. So it's hard. It was hard.
You mentioned a religion mood or environment, and I felt that sometimes when I went to some events or conferences, there was some kind of religious thing about Agile. It's like calling, oh, let's save Jesus, or let's save Agile. And I question myself sometimes if conference speakers like you and me, right? And let's put ourselves on spot right here. Didn't we contribute to creating fads around Agile?
I think so. Yeah. So everybody was guilty with this. Certainly the public speakers, certainly the writers. I would fall into both of those camps. Now, my approach was different. I was anybody that's seen me over the last 20 years knows I was pretty darn outspoken about some of the nonsense that I was seeing going on back in the day when it was going on. And I was also, I had the privilege of writing for software development at Dr. Dobbs' journal, where I was regularly doing research for them to find out what was actually going on in the industry, as opposed to the nonsense that was being spewed by all the gurus. And so what would happen is I would ask people, what are you actually doing? And there's ways to do that. Like this, this is easier said than done. And as opposed to like a lot, there's a lot of the Agile surveys out there that are basically a popularity contests when it gets down to like, what framework are you doing, or what techniques are you doing? Okay, that's interesting, but what are you actually doing, and what's working, and how are you working, are far more interesting questions. So for example, I had data showing that most Agile teams were not co-located, and they never were. Right. Yet the religion was spewing that, oh, all these Agile teams have got to be co-located. Right. So if you remember back, literally January of 2020, And you remember the nonsense that the speakers and the writers were talking, you were spewing back then about co-located teams. And every team had to be co-located or you're not agile, and it was evil, and like just all this crap. And then suddenly COVID hits. Well, by April of 2020, the same group of speakers, just a few months later, suddenly they've seen the light, and now they're all experts at remote agile. They can all help you, and they can coach and all this sort of stuff. It was totally different night and day. But up until that point, I was like the evil bastard for saying, "Well, wait, no, I've got the data showing that this is not, the minority of agile teams are co-located, and that the majority were actually distributed in some manner." So anyway, I'm a firm believer in fact-based discussions as opposed to religion-based discussions. So as a result, I was probably better than most at detecting some of these fads. And so if you remember, I don't know how long you've been around, but if you remember the Nokia test, that was a heck of a fad back in the day, right? Everybody had to pass the Nokia test. Isn't that wonderful? Well, where's Nokia now? Right? Now, and to be fair, that assessment was okay, but it was a fad, right? Because it was easy to communicate. Or all the Spotify names, right? Tribes and guilds and squads, and okay, that's cute, but it doesn't really pass the who cares test, right? So use them if it makes sense, but move on if it doesn't. Or failing fast. What a load of crap that was. Now, failing fast is way better than failing slowly. So I'll give them that, but it's still failing, right? And some people would spin it, well, I'm not really failing fast, I'm learning. Okay, but are you learning effectively? Maybe there could have been a better way of learning. Maybe I didn't have to waste my team's time experimenting with something just because I wasn't qualified as a coach to give them the advice to try that, right? It'd be like once it gets back, like a football, people want to call it a soccer coach because that's what we call it in North America. But anyway, it's like football coach, right? It'd be like me, just trust me, I know nothing about football, right? So, so imagine me coaching a bunch of little kids, trying to train them in football, European football. Proper football. And so I don't know what I'm doing. And then, so the kids run into a problem. They can't score or something, right? So, well, wait a minute. Last night on TV, I saw a hockey game. So clearly the problem is we should be wearing skates on the football pitch, right? So let's experiment with wearing skates when we're trying to play football, because I know nothing, right? So it sounds like a good idea. That hockey team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, they were doing really good wearing skates last night. So probably wearing skates to play football is a great idea. Let's experiment with that, kids. And yeah, we'd fail fast and a lot of people would get hurt. But what a fundamentally stupid thing to do. But it sounds like a good idea. And when you got a group of people with no clue, then yeah, running an experiment and then failing at it would be a lot better than running an experiment and then taking many weeks to fail at finding out that you don't wear skates when you're playing football, right? So this was the fun part. And so this fad provided air cover for all these people that didn't really know what they're talking about, but at least they were failing fast at it, right? And it was a cheap way to learn. No, it was a very expensive way to train coaches that should have known better. So yeah, and like I said, failing fast is way better than failing slowly, but there's many other ways to learn that are a heck of a lot more effective than failing at an experiment. So do that when it makes sense. Do other things when it makes sense to do those other things. But if you don't know that there's other ways to learn and you're a one-trick pony who only knows how to fail fast, then that's what you're going to do. So it gets back to these coaches being trained in very narrow bodies of knowledge, and they have to stick with those very bodies because that's all they know. So that's what they're going to coach you in. So they're doing the best they can. This was not it wasn't a bunch of evil people worshiping Satan doing this on purpose. It was just a lot of people that were doing the best that they could, but there was no real sort of controls. There was no barrier to entry. Like anybody could claim to be an agile coach, right? And were they but when the buyers, when the people hiring you don't really know what they're looking at, then you can get away with that. And now the frustrating thing is that the gold rush has ended. There's a lot of very good coaches out there who can't find work because everything is now so tainted. Like the word agile has become so tainted that nobody's hiring agile coaches, regardless, and they don't know, right? They can't tell who's the good coach and who's the bad coach. All they know is that they got burned by a lot of really bad agile coaches. So therefore, stay away from agile coaches. And this is what's going on right now in the marketplace. So it's gonna take a long time to recover from this.
Even not just agile coaches, but a lot of other things that are related to these promises that was not accomplished have been brushed with that, like certifications in general. So today, if we're talking, if a lot of serious certifications are not well seen because the name of a certification got, I don't know, brushed with this same problem that Agile had on the bed. So I want to mention that this list of mistakes of Agile that you just mentioned are part of an article you wrote, and I will put the link for that article here. It's here on the on the chat, so you can click there. It's an article on LinkedIn, and then you wrote a second article, and that second article is looking for the future, and that's where I would like to bring our conversation right now. And for that second article, can Agilists move forward after chatting the bed?
Yeah, I think so. So there's a lot of things that Agilists can do. And so this article, so that the second article is written from the point of view of, as an individual Agilist, what could I do today, or like start doing today, to help get out of this mess? Because there's a lot of people that are really being victimized here, and who are, they're out of work and struggling to find work and struggling to justify their roles in their organization. So one of them is, well, first of all, maybe you should, there's not everybody's going to make it into the lifeboat on this one. And there's still room for agile work, but nowhere near what it was. So a lot of people are going to get squeezed out, and you're going to, the first piece of advice was maybe it's time to consider moving on from agile, period. Stop pitching yourself as an agile coach or as an agile team lead, or whatever their role name is, when there simply isn't a lot of work there anymore, and there's not going to be a lot of work there for a while, and things are going to evolve anyways. So maybe it's just time to consider a career change, and that's and I think a lot of people are, right, because this is not a small blip. This is a worldwide problem. And there's and it's not like just, okay, it's going to be one bad quarter. It's been several bad quarters in a row, and it will continue like this, I think, for several years. So best advice I can give is, maybe you need to seriously consider moving on, at least for a while. Take the good stuff you have learned and apply it to something else would be probably my best advice.
What kind of professionals do you think organizations are looking for?
Well, I think the real thing is you need to add value. So whatever it is that you do, you might want to become a florist, for example, or you might want to become move into the data space, or move into being working for open a restaurant and serve people food. So you need to add real value. So whatever role you have in your organization, you have to add value. You have to be seen adding value, and it has to be something that leadership understands, right? Because I think what happened, like one of the reasons why a lot of Agilists are frustrated is because they believe they were adding value, and maybe they were, but if it's not measurable value, if I can't put a number against it, and if your entire story is, well, I'm helping this team do better, well, yeah, how much better was the first thing out of my mouth, and how do you measure that, and how can you show that you actually helped them get better, and it wasn't just they got better on their own despite what you were doing, right? Because I'm sure going back to the football coaching metaphor, like when I was a little kid, I was on a softball team playing baseball, and we learned how to play regardless of our really bad coach. So we just figured, we were still a mediocre team, but certainly the coach was not helping as much as you would have hoped. So anyway, so you've got to add real value, and it's got to be visible, measurable value. Otherwise, you're always going to be at risk if that's not your situation.
No, I believe there are a lot of people like me that work as consultants or coaches or people who are listening to you and thinking about themselves. Is there still a place for me as a coach? I believe there's still going to be coaches in soccer or football, right? Are there places for coaches in this next, let's say, next months or next period?
Yeah, there definitely are. There's always been room for coaches. There's always going to be football coaches. There's always going to be hockey coaches. There's always going to be executive coaches and coaches in any sort of field where you need to learn how to do the job, and particularly when teams are involved, right? Because it's that you might have the individuals might have the skills to do part of it, but somebody needs to coach the entire team to do the job. Now, arguably, that might be the team lead's role or the manager's role, or whatever type of leadership you've got in that team. So there's always going to be room for coaches. There's always going to be need and room for coaching, but you need to be qualified to do it, right? So one of the there's many coaching organizations out there, but one of them is the International Coaching Federation, and it's hard to get certified in that. It takes like 6 months, I think, for the beginner level coach certification of them. 6 months, not 2 days, 6 months of hard work, and where you're being coached and you're being tested, and you've got to, it's all interactive, collaborative, hands-on type stuff. So that's a respectable certification, right? And there's a real learning journey there, and so I think there's that, right? So you've got to really have the background to do the job you're claiming that you can do. So this is new. This is, I think, sadly, it's a new concept for a lot of Agile people. It's like literally like I would run into people in the Agile world, like on Agile teams, and I'd be trying to help them learn and get better, and they wouldn't have a concept of having a background in what they were doing. It just wasn't there for them because everybody else was doing it, right? So I think that the rules have changed. We're back to reality now, and you need to have the skills and the background to do your job, right? So you got to earn it. You don't buy your way into this anymore. You got to earn it. It's going to be a bit harder for people, and good.
Yeah, and will some work still be available for Agilists?
Yeah, well, I think so some if you look at like some of the better coaches, the more senior coaches, they really were like they were getting there, right? They were learning on the job, and they were picking up some of the skills that they need. Now, unfortunately, if they limited themselves to just the Agile canon or whatever framework that they were coaching in, then they were really they were being boxed in, and they didn't know it. So for example, one of the things I talk about in the article is for a small subset of Agile coaches, particularly the more senior ones, they really were on a path to becoming enterprise designers, whether they knew that or not. So one group that I work with, the Intersection Group, for many years now has been focusing on this area, and they're a very collaborative group. They take a holistic approach to enterprise design, and they're doing a fantastic job. They're promoting a new language that they've developed, a very simple and straightforward language called Edgy, to help enterprise designers interact with each other, and a little bit of tool vendor stuff going on too, and doing a great job. So what I suggest in the article is for people who are leaning in that direction, they should take a look at what's going on with the Intersection Group, and then get serious about their career. Like if you really, because it's very interesting being an enterprise designer. It's a great career, but it's something that's going to take you years to develop, like to get the experience and to get the knowledge, not just days. So it's great, and the intersection group is all about helping people to do that, and to get on that learning path and to help them through it. So I think it's one thing to look at, but the critical, and I might not have been clear about this in the article, this is only for, that option is only for a very small percentage of the Agile coaches out there, because there's only so much room for enterprise designers, right? It was like if you remember when, still be a problem, like with the product owner role, right? That was always hard to fill for many reasons. But one of the reasons, but one problem with that role is, why would people go into it to begin with? What's the career path? And the trite response was always, well, maybe you'll work your way up and become a product manager. Okay, fine. That was absolutely true. How many product managers are actually needed compared to the number of product owners there are, right? So it's like 20 to 1, 50 to 1. I don't know what the exact ratio was, but it'd be something nasty like that, right? So yeah, a small handful of product owners would eventually work their way up to become product managers. Good for them. It's like, how many project managers become portfolio managers? Well, 1 in 50, something like that. How many consultants working for a big consulting firm become partners? 1 in 100, maybe, something like that. So just be aware that you're on a career, that the primary career path you're being sold is only for a select few. Are you one of those select few? Maybe. Probably not, though. Odds are you're not. So where do you go? So I think that's just, and that's the thing with enterprise designers, right? For every enterprise designer, there might be 100 coaches, 100 team coaches. I don't know. Once again, I don't know what the ratio is, but it'll be something uncomfortable like that.
Yeah, and the naming is not very clear when you say that the bottom of the pyramid are masters and coaches. That's kind of odd, right? So you should have a lot of players to have a coach on the top, and that creates some expectations that were not fulfilled. I can follow that. So my last question, to try to summarize the ideas here, and maybe you can try to wrap up. Is Agile dead?
No, it's not. I think the Agile gold rush is certainly off, and that's over. It's not coming back. If you're waiting for it to come back, good luck. I think but Agile is not dead. Now, I think, and I'm actually working on a detailed article about this very topic right now. But I think, so several things that I want to leave you with is that in some ways, we need to go back to basics, and there's a good movement. Some of the original writers of the manifesto are working on bringing Agile back to basics. I think that's good, but that's only going to be for software development, for what I can tell. And I think which is perfect, but Agile is certainly applicable to beyond software development. So I think we need to look in that direction as well. I think, we do need to, like the first article, particularly this idea of focusing on stuff and not fluff. There's a lot of great stuff out there, and the stuff takes time to learn. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement around, can we really train people up in test-driven development and really, really get people going on that, on some of the technical techniques like refactoring and database refactoring and automated testing, and getting really serious about that, on helping people get real skills in architecture, in real skills in analysis and design, and understanding when to do it. Now, the challenge is one of the traditional communities right now are getting a little cocky. They think they've won. They have not. This certainly, Agile has a setback right now, but I think that we really need to be focused on how do we work, how do we do business analysis in an agile, lean, adaptive, nimble way? How do we do architecture in an agile, lean, nimble, adaptive way? Pick whatever adjective you want. And it's not just an adjective issue, right? So this is, fixing this problem is not going to be, renaming Agile and calling it yabba dabba do, right? All that, because that's just going to stink. Our customers are smart. If we rename Agile to yabba dabba do, they're going to hear all the marketing nonsense again, and they just say, well, like yabba dabba do, that's just Agile with a new name. Who cares? And then we're cooked if we even try something like that. But anyways, what are you going to do? So I think there's a lot of great nuggets of value in the Agile community, and I think we need to focus on that. And I think we need to be very wary of the certification scams. We need to be very wary of any sort of easy fixes, easy wins. There aren't any. There are not any. I guarantee that. There are no easy fixes here, and the real solution is hard work, learn your stuff, know what you're doing, and have the background to do it, and know when to do something and when not to do it. Understand the context that you're working in, and that takes time, takes experience, and we also need to wash the stink off, right? So right now we've got this problem that if we start rah Agile again, nobody's going to listen. They just don't care. They could barely tolerate it to begin with. But and this was the other thing too, right? A lot of the Agile gold rush was because the organizations didn't really know what they were looking at, but everybody else was doing Agile, so therefore I need to do Agile too. This was the level of thinking that we had from the executives. So, and this accelerated and prolonged the gold rush for years. But now and this is why, it went up and now crashed very quickly, because everybody clued in all at once, and they're not going to fall for that again. So we really do need to deliver real value. So I think Agile's not dead. Certainly the gold rush is over. Certainly the name is a bit of a swear word and will be for several more years. Rebranding is not the answer here. And it's going to be a waste of time. We need to fix the brand. We need, we need to make Agile meaningful again, not rename it, not try to get the scam going again, because it's not going to work.
Yes, at least we should be addressing the mistakes that you mentioned. We should have real certifications online and separate the bad ones for the good ones, or in some way. We should not believe in magical solutions. There's no magic stick that you can.
There's no easy win. And I don't, we've been beating up on certification a lot, and rightfully so. But I'm a firm believer in certification. It is a way to learn. It is a way to get knowledge. But the certifications need to be meaningful. They need to be earned. So even on LinkedIn, I list several certifications that I've got. I've got a lot of certifications. I list a small handful of them, like the ones that are respectable, the ones that I earned. Those are the ones that I list. I don't list the easy ones. I don't list the effective, the ones that I bought, because, well, it doesn't say anything, right? It doesn't look good on me. That I would list these certifications that basically are a commodity that anybody can get. Years ago, pardon me.
Anybody can buy, right?
Yeah, anybody can buy it. So years ago, years ago there was a problem with, and I was the cause of it. Was there was a rumor that people could certify their dogs. And I made a joke at a conference. I think it was the Agile 2008 conference. Maybe it was the 2006. I can't remember. But anyway, one of the big Agile conferences, I was riffing on the CSM and saying, well, if you look at the qualification at the time, which was to stay awake in a 2-day workshop, my dog could become certified. I think I probably even wrote that up for software development as a column. And it was true. so what happened? And what happened was one of the Scrum certification companies certified their dog because the dog was sat in on their workshops as they were teaching them. Right, people bring their dog to work. Right, so the instructors were bringing their dog to work, and the dog was more than qualified as a result. And so they certified the dog, and they actually had the certificate of attendance, and it was a CSM. So the Scrum Alliance put a rule in place that dogs, house pets couldn't be certified, and then because this was before the test was in place, right?
Right.
And then a year or two later, they finally put a test in place and stuff like that. So this was the level that we had back in the day, and nobody was saying anything back then about that. And look what happened. So. But good for them. They made a lot of money. They got and they helped a lot of people.
And that was a point that I would like to bring to this end of this chat, because in another perspective, Agile was very well succeeded. If you think about the word before Agile, the Agile Manifesto, and how the people who are trying to put their ideas on Agile at first, they were very badly seen. They were not, people didn't trust them, and it created a way to become a fad, as you said, but also to become the regular way of how companies are working today. When you talk about Agile, we're not talking about some way of development. We're talking about the mainstream, right? So Agile is the mainstream today. So in some way, that strategy worked, but it had to pay the price for it, about becoming so popular.
And that's a great view, and because it's absolutely true, right? So Agile did win, and it is the norm. It's here to stay, but we really need to flush away some of the really bad things in the Agile community too. And I think we're paying the price right now for the bad stuff that we didn't prune away when we should have. And we should have focused on the stuff, and we should have focused on the good and accentuated that. And we should not have looked away when these questionable things were happening. And we should not have just thrown up our hands in disgust when certain frameworks were being adopted by organizations, and then promises weren't being fulfilled. We really, and that to me was a lack of, very clearly a lack of professionalism, because we weren't a professional body. There was no, if you look at what engineering is a profession, being a lawyer, being a doctor, those are professions. Being Agile is not a profession. Arguably software engineering is not a profession because there's not really a governing body. There's some, could be, it should be a profession, but
there's the sweet book, but not a professional body yet.
Yeah. There's some very clear criteria for being a profession, which the software industry does not meet. Yes, it could, but it doesn't, and it won't in our lifetime. I just don't see anything forcing the issue. So, and certainly, the Agile community did not act in a professional manner as a community, and just look what happened. It wasn't professional. Sorry.
Yeah, for good and for bad, right? For good and for bad. It reached some areas that maybe if it was a professional, it was narrowed. Today we are talking about Agile in very different areas in the organization. So it reached when it became a mindset. It reached some different levels in organization, which is really cool. But
To be fair, the Agile community has had a huge impact. It's done a lot of positive things, but it did a lot of negative things too, and now it's paying the price. And but like I said, we'll have a couple bad years, and I hope we learn. I hope we choose to get better. I'm gonna do what I can to make things better, and I hope others make that choice too.
Just as a last comment, can people reach you? Or I know we are already expecting for the third article. Is that the final piece of this sequence?
Yeah, yes and no, because I'm working on a fourth one as well. But I think so. In the official series, there's going to be 3 articles, and there'll be the third one will be posted online on LinkedIn again. I will update the first and second articles to point to the third one, so it'll go.
The second article is also here at the comments, so if people want to follow the link.
But the fourth article is actually one about the topic of Agile architecture that I'm writing for an architecture portal, basically talking about the effect, how all this stuff that we just talked about here affected architecture and what architects should do. And frankly, I might probably do a few others along the similar vein. Just like doing a deep dive into a narrow topic type of a style.
That's cool. We will be looking forward to that. If people want to follow you, LinkedIn is the place. Is there another place to connect with you or to follow your articles?
ScottAmbler.com is a good site. AgileModeling.com and AgileData.org are also good sites to reach me at.
Perfect, Scott. Thank you very much for joining me. We are finishing this episode right now. Please stay a little bit before the end so we can wrap up between us. And for those who followed us or who are watching it recorded later, thank you for joining. Remember, if you liked it, give your like on the video, subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Bye-bye, Scott. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye. Have a great one, everybody.